So as I explained in my last video, I've never been that good at games despite playing them for 20 plus years. But as I made more of an effort to persevere, I did manage to beat some games that I never expected to. And here's the top 10 that I found hardest. There will be a lot of NES games on this list, and it's not because that's all I play, but because those are the ones that I usually find the hardest. The first game on my list, however, is not an NES game. The difficulty of this game comes from one-hit kills and some iffy hit detection, as well as not being able to continue on the last stage. Usually flaws like this would make me give up, but with this one I didn't, and that's why it's on the list. This is a hidden gem from Konami that only came out on the Famicom disk system. It plays like a mix of Mega Man and Legend of Zelda. You have to shoot everywhere to uncover weapon upgrades or armor items like power shoes, astroware and astro pants. The game starts out fairly manageable, but the difficulty ramps up later and I was stuck on level 5 for quite a long time. The two mini-bosses I felt were almost impossible to dodge and survive. Eventually I somehow got past them and also beat the final boss, Satan, and the game. Being able to save was what made it possible for me to beat this one. Thank you, Famicom Disk System. After beating Mega Man X1, I found X2 and 3 to be a bit unfair in its challenges. At least finding hearts and sub-tanks were, and those I would say are very necessary if you want to beat the Mega Man X game. But Mega Man X4 struck a happier balance, at least until the final stage. Like usual, you have to fight all the bosses over again, and then there are 3 forms of the final boss, Sigma. The third form is not in its own stage, so every time I died I have to fight all 3 all over again. I was playing this one weekday evening and I knew I had to beat it this evening, because if I were to quit and use continue, I would have had to beat the 8 Maverick robots again as well, and that can be grueling in itself. The only glimmer of light was that there's an energy pickup just before the final boss, so I could pick it up, have it added to the sub-tanks, die and repeat until they were full, which I knew I needed. The downside is that it took a long time to refill the sub-tanks this way, several continues. The first form of Sigma is very easy. I found 3 separate ways to not get hit by it at all. The second form was much harder. It really demanded a pattern, because if Sigma got to throw his sickle into the ground, it was basically all over. I had to lure him to throw it at the wall, where it would be harmless. In the end, I was able to beat this form while taking just 2 hits or less. The third form was complex, and it had 2 main parts with 2 different life bars. Getting through this without taking many hits was impossible for me, but here the saved sub-tanks came to my aid. Finally, at about 1:30 at night, I beat Sigma's third form and the game. I was tired at work the next day, but it was worth it. The Ninja Gaiden games are some of the hardest ever made, and I've tried Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2, but never gotten far. Ninja Gaiden 3 would have been the same story, if not for the fact that the Famicom version is easier. The NES version doesn't have continues, but the Famicom version does. And you take less damage from enemies too. These changes, along with the overall good control, meant that this game wasn't that difficult. That is, until the last stage. Here, some classic Ninja Gaiden difficulty comes into play, with spikes galore, annoying flying enemies, and disappearing platforms. And then, the first form of the final boss is extremely aggravating. Every time you hit him, he shoots 3 lightning bolts, and it seems like you can avoid them if you keep running, but then he hits you every now and then anyway.
I don't get it. I hate when games set rules and then break them.
Again, irony struck, as after I've spent tens and tens of tries on the first form, I beat the second form in 1 try and the final form in 2. The NES version of Ninja Gaiden 3 is too hard for me, but I still consider beating the Famicom version as an achievement, thanks to the last stage being the way it is. So, where's my medal? I bought Batman on Famicom, never expecting to beat it. But thanks to its unlimited continues and great music to keep me going, I did it eventually. This game is also an example of enemy respawning being used to one's advantage, because here you can kill an enemy, get an item, walk back a bit and return for another item. The Joker took many tries as expected, but if the other boss would have come back every time, I would definitely not have beaten it. Super Mario Bros. 3 has one of the best difficulty curves of any game in my opinion. It starts easy and grows difficult in a very smooth manner. But in the final world, things get really serious. The quick small airships level demands expert jumping, and the 2 regular levels are really tricky, especially if you don't have many items saved up. Then there's the mini castle, which is like a maze without end. Even with cheats I used to run around aimlessly and run out the clock, or fall in the lava. I beat the NES version, but the Famicom version is a bit harder because when you are transformed and get hit, you revert to small Mario instead of just losing your power. Sure, Super Mario World is more difficult with its Star Road, but I never finished Star Road and it's not required to beat the game anyway. So the nod and the number 7 spot goes to my favorite game of all time, Super Mario Bros. 3. It's a me, Mario! I have something hard for you! Here's another game whose last stage almost drove me insane. For some reason the last password only gets you to the 3rd to last stage instead of the very last. And the 3rd to last stage is very hard, having to jump upwards in an elevator shaft while anticipating what's ahead and dealing with slowdown. Then follows an airship stage with annoying witch enemies that are annoyingly hard to kill before they hit you. But the final stage is the worst. It has 3 bosses that have to be beaten again every time you die. And after the first game over, you lose the heart upgrades that you've been collecting throughout the game, which makes you have to do everything within just 3 hits. After a good while I got the hang of the first boss, but the second boss doesn't quite play by the rules as I found it to be very tricky not to get hit. Then the final boss you can only hit while it itself is shooting, and the margin for error is small. Ironically, again, when I finally beat it, I did it all without getting hit once. Up to now the games on my list have been ones where there were unlimited continues. Journey to Silius, or RAF World as the Famicom version is known, doesn't. In this game you have 3 lives and 3 continues and that's it. There are no extra life pickups and the energy pellets are very rare.
Whoa, health! Wow! Miracles do happen.
For a long time getting past the second stage felt impossible. But the incredible music did its part of spurring me on, I can say. The game also never felt unfair. The enemies are always in the same places, and they don't respawn. The whole game just feels very deliberate and planned out, so I could never get too angry at it.
Die? Why didn't it die?
Although the last stage, which has no enemies and focuses on platforming, was a bit misguided and annoying. Again, I beat the final boss on my first try, taking no damage. Overall though, this game really deserves its place at number 3. Oh boy, Mega Man 9. Although this was a good game, I've sworn to never play it again. My time-honored tactic of grinding for E-tanks did its part for the bosses, but it couldn't help me against the super frustrating stages. Tornado Man stage was the worst with its rotating platforms, and the gravity-free part of Dr. Wily's stage, where you had to dodge spikes, was also unforgiving. I just felt exhausted after every stage I cleared, and when I beat the game I felt more relieved than happy. Very, very difficult. Castlevania is hands down the hardest game I've ever beaten. I played it on the Famicom disk system, where saving is the saving grace. I think I got up to and past stage 4 with more luck than skill. But stage 5... I was stuck on stage 5 for several months. I would try it every other evening, training basically. The angry video game nerd did not lie about that hallway before the Grim Reaper. It really is one of the hardest parts of any game. Those few times I did get past it, I would have little energy left for the Grim Reaper boss, so I rarely got to fight him and get better at it, which enhanced my feeling of despair here. I don't remember how I finally did it, but I did it. Then of course there was another stage to go, with the Big Bat, the first boss of the game, now acting as a regular enemy. Here the getting knocked back business was a really big problem, and finding the right rhythm to jump past the bats took some practice. Then a clock tower part, a Castlevania tradition, with annoying birds that drop flea men. Extremely luckily, the game saves right before the stairs ahead of Dracula. Dracula was a hard fight. There was more of a pattern and method to beating him than there was with the Grim Reaper, but I still found it harder. Sometimes Dracula would teleport to right where I was standing, and sometimes when I tried to hit his face he had already started to disappear, making the hit not count. And in what seems like Proto-Man tradition, Dracula's first form was harder to beat than the second, at least with the holy water. First I tried using the cross, but I found that the paralyzing power of the holy water was absolutely imperative to kill this bastard. I remember jumping with joy and being on cloud 9 for quite a while after beating Castlevania. I felt that finally I had accomplished something that put me on par with the average hardcore gamer. I'll never quite understand why some gamers like to punish themselves with super difficult games, but I can understand the thrill of triumphing over odds stacked against you. I'll still play games to have fun, but nowadays I can appreciate a reasonable challenge as well.